Good morning. I'm Sandy Farlow, and I'm a member of the worship team. Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church. Welcome to those seated here and those who are joining us on our online platforms. We are so glad to have you here today to celebrate our season of commitment, our annual stewardship drive. The theme this year is Gifts of the Heart, and we'll share more about that during the service. Stewardship drives are part of building and strengthening our mission here at Community Church as we nourish spirits, work for justice, and transform lives. We are living in a universe, possibly part of a multiverse. We are living in the Milky Way, a part of a local group of galaxies, a part of a supercluster of galaxies. We are living in a solar system in a spiral arm of the Milky Way. We are living on a planet powered by a star, by the sun. We are living on a planet called Earth, with rocks and trees and birds and leaves and oceans and mountains and lakes and everything beautiful and everything good to care for as they care for us. We are living today with time to do good for ourselves and for each other. We have a combination chalice lighting and congregational reading this morning. Joyce, will you lead us, please?
Please join me in saying these words by Everett Hale as we light the flame of our faith. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do.
What does it mean to be here today? How do we want to live? And who will we be to each other? Please join me as we say our covenant together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. Stewardship means taking care of what we value and enabling it to grow. We know this. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are logical, rational people. People who are well aware that maintaining any organization requires funding. And yet, we hate to talk about money. It makes us so anxious that we don't even like to say the word. Often we don't call it money. We call it, here at church, we call it treasure. But more on that later. But think of some other names for money. What do we call it? Gifts. Funding. Cash. Moolah. Filthy lucre. Come on, there's a lot of them. Bread. Green. All these names we have so we don't have to say money. And songs about money in our culture mostly talk about money and greed, or money and having more, or having none, or how to make it by illegal means. There are a lot of rap tunes about money. Or the hustle it takes, working 9 to 5. In fact, I only know 2 songs that I can think of that sort of celebrate money. And they're both from an era when people had so little of it, the Great Depression. So how about this one? We're in the money, we're in, you see the tap dancing girls, or Happy Days Are Here Again. That one doesn't even say money, but we all knew what it was about. Included a little bit of inherent irony, I think. And much of the world thinks that money is a measurement of not just success in a particular area, but of whether or not you're a worthwhile being. You may even think that. You know, one of the most common answers about why people don't talk about money is shame. Either that they don't have it or that they do. Money is laden with guilt and envy and embarrassment, all tangled up with social comparison and personal worth. No wonder we're uncomfortable. Can we stop thinking of money as a measurement and begin to think of it as a tool? You might argue that if someone needed help with a screwdriver or a table saw, they would ask their neighbor to come over and help them out. So why is it so difficult with money? Many of us here were probably told by our parents not to talk about money because it's rude. And sometimes it is, that social comparison thing again. Many of us grew up learning that money is one of the topics, like politics or sex or religion, that you should avoid in polite company. You don't brag about your net worth. You don't share your salary with colleagues. You don't even ask your friends about their expenses, even if it might help you put your own budget in some kind of order. And talk about being uncomfortable. A New York Times survey reported that more people surveyed would rather talk to a sex therapist than a financial advisor. I'm not sure who comprised their sample, but we are discouraged from talking about money at every turn. But if you want to learn about money or be secure in any financial situation, talking about it is necessary. And part of that is to examine our own money stories. You know, your money story includes your thoughts, your beliefs, and your feelings around money, along with your collection of experiences and recollections and memories that come together to form that story. Once we start talking about money, often as an adult, it can be overwhelming to realize just how many years of habits we have to overcome. Early childhood influences us more than we might realize. Behavioral researchers from Cambridge University say that kids start learning about money as young as 3, and most of their attitudes and feelings about money are set by the time they're 7. Our observations are often our first teachers. Since very few parents know the best way to sit down and effectively talk about a 401k with their 4-year-olds, the money behavior kids see most is spending. Everything else, like saving or budgeting or investing or donating, happens behind the scenes. And these days, so much of our spending is by credit card. A step of removal that is baffling to everyone who hasn't had to pay the bill. You know, Mom, I need a new bike. Daddy, I need a new dress for the prom. We can't afford that. We don't have the money. Well, but you have plastic. The beginning of my own money story is an incident from my childhood. I was probably 7. My mom told me to come with her uptown because she was in a hurry and she needed my help. My job was to run into the city treasurer's office with her check for the water bill while she went to the grocery store across the street. When we got back in the car on the way home, I asked her why we had to pay for money. It was obviously free. There were water fountains all over town. Well, she asked me how did I think that happened. She explained that pumps had to pull the water out of the ground and that the water pipes had to be installed so that all the other people had water in their houses too, and that essentially she gave me a short lecture on labor, materials, and taxes. It wasn't a very good talk, but remember she was in a hurry. Another story. I always had a job, starting early, of course, by babysitting, but by the time I was 12, I had real jobs and I got a paycheck. Waitressing, retailing at the fabric store, odd jobs at the newspaper. I wandered in there because I liked the smell of ink from the presses. And teaching swimming and lifeguarding at the city pool, all through high school and college. But no matter what job I had, I just brought home my check and I gave it to my dad. If I wanted to buy something, I asked my dad if I had money and could I do that. When I went to college, I had a checkbook, and my mother called me once and she said, "Hey, you have some pink slips from the bank." I didn't know what that meant. That was not a very good talk either. My point being that I was oblivious about money and kind of grew up with no money sense. Back to the social comparison thing, I actually didn't learn that my family was lower middle class until I went away to college. I always thought we were rich because we had what we needed at home. Fortunately, my family did instill a sense of responsibility, if not money sense, so I knew that as an adult, I had to work in order to pay the bills and to keep food on the table. And it was pretty hand to mouth sometimes. Money was just a necessity. Even setting aside the social taboo of discussing money, there are practical hurdles in your way of getting better at money. Learning about money is intimidating, and there's almost no structural system in place to teach us. Everybody uses money, and only 6 U.S. states actually require that high schoolers take a personal finance course. I didn't know that I had poor money skills. Partially, as a woman of my generation, I thought it was supposed to be the man's job. And as an adult on my own, I was a little ashamed and embarrassed, and I was prideful. I didn't want anyone to know how hard it was. And my family didn't always approve of my lifestyle, so I certainly couldn't ask them for advice. There's more to my story, but I wanted you to hear this, to begin thinking about your own stories and how important that is in the way you look at money in your life. It's so important that we're actually going to do an adult RE class on that in, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. Nobody is born with an innate understanding of money. But once you understand your own story, your own relationship to the idea of money, it becomes possible for you to talk about money as a tool. Break the silence. It's hard to learn about something when you're discouraged from talking about it. And in some ways, money silence becomes a tool for oppression. Talking and learning about money is crucial for change. Not talking about money can have sweeping social effects, like stopping women from getting equal pay for equal work. And I'm not talking about the historical women's liberation movements or about Lily Ledbetter, though bless their souls. I'm talking about 2024 and Google. I'm talking about Navient overcharging and misleading student loan holders, and Wells Fargo for charging their clients for fraudulent service. I'm talking about being a victim of scamming. Not talking about money can be really uncomfortable too. These days, it's arguably more important than ever to talk about money as a tool, because we want our money to serve us, not the other way around. This is the money season here at CUUC, and your stewardship committee members are going to be talking with each of you, and it might be a little awkward or a little bit uncomfortable. But we're going to do that, and you'll talk to us. And we'll talk about your time and talent, too. But we on the Stewardship Committee want to be completely transparent about what we're doing right now and about how we spend the money that you provide. We want you to feel right about your pledge, that it's fair and equitable, to see that your money is a tool to support the engine that is this church, the motor that runs our mission. Treasure is not a pirate's chest to bury. We don't hoard jewels like in Aladdin's cave. Treasure is meant to be used to support what you treasure, what you hold dear. Give your money added value by spending it on what you value most in your life. Make money a tool that you use well. Kiki, you're up, girl. That's right. This is the good part.
Okay, but I'm up here as stewardship, not as treasurer, so it'll be good. Good morning. Good morning. I love that so much. So I get to talk about, I'm not here as treasurer, I'm here as head of stewardship, which I'm only doing for both just for a little bit longer. I'm not crazy, I am, but I'm not doing both of those for very much longer, so. But I am gonna talk about gifting as opposed to giving, and I make the distinction in a little bit. It is better to give than receive. Did we all hear this as kids? I heard it as a kid. I knew it for what it was. It was not true. And I'm like, no. I went to those McDonald's birthday parties. I grew up in the 70s. I'm that old. And I'd pick out the present for my friend that I wanted. That's the present you pick for your friends, is the one I want to play with, because maybe they'll invite you over and you play with it. And I'd wrap it up in the paper that I liked, and I'd give it to them, and they had a big pile of presents. And they got to go home with the pile of presents that I wanted to play with. And I got a little paper lunch bag full of little party favors that I did not want. And I'm like, no, it is definitely not better to give than receive. I'm like, these are things that your parents tell you so you don't throw a fit when you have to give the present away. That's what I thought for years. But that's giving. Then later, and not too much later, as like a teenager, I discovered gifting. And I make that distinction. Giving is when you give something to somebody. Gifting is when you're like, what do they really want? What's going to mean something to them? It's a gift. Give is just something you give away. Give away clothes to Goodwill. A gift is something that's meaningful to both of you. My real dad, if you're from the South, you might have called him ornery or pesky. We called him pesky a lot. First of all, the two problems with giving gifts to my father was if you asked him what he wanted for Christmas or his birthday, his answer was always, I was a teenager, he wanted tube socks or underwear. As a 15-year-old, the last thing I wanted to do was buy grown men tighty-whitey underwear. I'm like, no, not happening. The other problem is no matter what you bought him and you'd wrap it, he'd look at it, and then he'd look at you and he'd go, it's a shirt. It's a book. And he was right, and it drove me crazy. And I'm like, I'm going to get him. The one thing we really had in common is we both love music. And again, I was a child of the 70s, so this was in the 80s. So I bought him a cassette tape. And I'm like, okay, how do I do a cassette tape that he's not going to know it's a cassette tape? I'm going to get him this year. Yeah. And I'm like, I didn't have boxes like this. I didn't have Amazon, of course, back then, so I couldn't just get a giant box and stuff it, whatever. I'm like, okay, what have I got? I got a shirt box, because, that's what you have. He also was a big fan of jelly beans. So I put some tissue paper in it. I put the cassette in the middle of the tissue paper, and I filled this shirt box with jelly beans. I mean, full. Wrapped it all up, big bow. When he went to shake it, you know what a box full of jelly beans sounds like? Not a cassette tape is what it sounds like. And so he's got his smug look and he shook it. And of course, when you pick up a box of jelly beans, it kind of shifts, because all the jelly beans want to slide a little. And he looked at me and I'm like, I got you a gift. What's in it? He hadn't a clue. It was great. I loved it. He passed away a couple of years ago. But until then, when we get together, he'd be telling stories. That was always one. Neither one of us could remember what that cassette tape was. Haven't a clue. But we remembered the jelly beans. We remembered the gift and why I did it and the story about that. When we talked about our relationship, that was one of those moments, is this gift and why I gave it to him and what it meant to the two of us. A few years later, in my late teens, my stepdad, my other dad, decided to get my mom one of her A-list gifts. They had come to a point in their financial situation. She had an A-list and she had a B-list. I dream of having an A-list and a B-list. I don't think I'm ever going to get there, but she had an A-list. And I was like, what's on your A-list? I'm like, oh, that's an A-list. Okay. B-list was like, I'd like a new KitchenAid mixer. The A-list was an A-list. This particular year, he's like, I'm going to get her a big one. Because he was bad at buying presents, gifts, giving, everything. He usually waited until Christmas Eve and went to whatever was open. So she had a huge collection of copper cookware. Because there was a store in the office building where he worked that sold copper cookware that was open on Christmas Eve. And he'd be leaving, and they would gift wrap it, so she got a lot of copper cookware. And he's like, she's going to kill me if I get her another copper double boiler. I'm like, yeah, she's probably going to kill you. She was the type of person who would color coordinate all the gift wrap. Every year we'd have a different theme. See, some of you are nodding, you're like, oh, either you did that or you knew somebody who did that. And she'd get the really wide wired ribbon so you could do these massive bows. Everything had a bow. It was gorgeous. The present she got, if she was lucky, had the little stick-on bows. If she was lucky, because none of us could do the bows. So I'm like, okay, this year, he's getting her the A-list present. I'm going to wrap it. And I'm going to put a bow on it. And it was a big present. I'll tell you right now, she got a mink coat. I got to go shopping because he needed to make sure it was the right size, so I got to stand on my tippy toes and try on mink coats. I was like 16. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. It's the only time I've ever gotten to wear a mink coat, but I did for like 2 minutes. But he was getting her a coat. Those are big boxes. They're really big. Took me a whole roll of paper. But then I'm like, okay, I need a bow. This is not going to cut it. Not going to cut it. So I bought a roll of ribbon. And I remembered what she taught me about how to do it. I used the whole roll of ribbon on a big one. The bow was this big. And we put it under the tree Christmas Eve so she didn't see it coming, because if it'd been there, she'd know. And she came out Christmas morning and she's like, and the thing that got her, because she knew what was in the box, because there's only one thing. It wasn't a Mercedes. It's not. So she knew what was in the box. But what got her was there was this giant red bow. And I'm like, I didn't do what's inside of it, but I did the bow. And she was so excited because she'd never gotten a really big, pretty bow. And I'm like, okay, nailed it. I got jelly beans. I got that. Okay. Clearly, they got real difficult to shop for. That was my teens, and they're buying mink coats. Then I moved out and went to college. You don't buy presents for people who buy them for each other. I don't know what to buy for you. Eventually, we just stopped. We're like, whatever you want, you probably already have. But until we got to that point, I'm a college student and I'm broke. What do you gift people who do that kind of thing? My stepfather grew up in a hotel family. They had hotels in Pennsylvania. If any of you are from Pennsylvania, he had the Molly Pitcher and the James Wilson Hotel in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was his family's hotels. They ran them. He worked there as a kid. And I'm like, okay. He's always talking about these hotels. This was when eBay was real popular. I went on eBay. like Molly Pitcher Hotel. I found a menu from the Molly Pitcher Hotel from the 50s. And I'm like, okay. $4.50 later, I got it was mimeographed, so it was purple. You guys remember mimeographs? I was like, it was a little folder that they would just put the mimeographs in. A steak was 26 cents. I was like, man, this is cool. And this was in like June, because I just had a little notification on eBay. Whenever anything comes up for the Molly Pitcher, you let me know. And I put it in my closet. And then I found some postcards from the Molly Pitcher. It hadn't even been mailed, just somebody had a bunch of old postcards. Perfect condition. They were like $3. Take them. Sold. I got into a bidding war on eBay. You can do that. Over a person who collected ashtrays, because they had a James Wilson ashtray. Never been used. It was pristine. I bid on it. And almost immediately somebody outbid me. I'm like, no. Bid. And again, I'm like, what is, no. But first of all, I was not going to let this go. Second of all, I knew who was doing it because it was eBay. So I sent a message to the person. And I'm like, I'm just letting you know. This is my dad's hotel. He grew up in this hotel. And I lied and said, no amount of money is too great. Total lie. And they're like, oh, he messaged me back almost immediately. He's like, oh, I just collect old ashtrays. You can have it. I'm like, yes. So for the next 3 Christmases, I had an ashtray, I had some postcards, I had a menu. Whole thing cost me like $15. Thought I was a genius. That menu and those postcards, he had matted and framed, and they hang in his office. We currently run a hotel management company. They're in his office in the hotel management company. That ashtray sits on his desk. My favorite memory of giving him those things was the look on his face when he opened it up and the absolute shock of going, is this what I think it is? Because he remembered those things. And he was like, wait, I know what this is. And that reaction for me was almost, I think, as good as him getting that gift. It was just, his reaction for me was a gift that I love. Okay, so why am I regaling you with these stories of what I bought my parents for Christmas all these years ago? Because they're stories of giving gifts, not of obligatory things, like when you show up at the birthday party. I mean, let's face it, when you're a kid and you show up at the birthday party, that's your ticket of entry, is you put the wrapped toy on the pile, and that's how you get to go to McDonald's and go to the birthday party. It's the start of the stewardship drive. I would like for you guys to think about what this church means to you and what gift would be appropriate to express that feeling. It's not the ticket of entry. There's no obligation. If you're a member, you don't have to pledge to stay a member. There's some churches that do that. We don't. You can be a member for as long as you want and never pay a dime. You don't have to. But I'd like for you to think about what we mean to you and what you would like to give to express, to share that emotion with us. It's not the same as buying anything. It's not the same as putting something under a tree. But I'd like for you to think of this more like giving a gift and less like paying an electric bill. Because sometimes that's what it feels like. It's like, oh, pledge drive. I got to write a check. It's not an electric bill. It is a gift, and we are very grateful when you guys make those promises and write those checks for us. So that's my inspirational story. Now I get to talk about numbers. We're asking a lot of the congregation this year. It's our 50th anniversary, in case you somehow missed it. We've been here, not in this building, but in existence for 50 years. In light of that, and in hopes of closing our budget gap, which we've been struggling with for the past few years, we're asking everyone who has pledged in the past to increase their pledge $50 a month. which is a really big ask. I know. To put that in perspective, if everyone who gave last year did that $50 a month, we would raise $196,000 in pledges, which feels like a big number. It still wouldn't balance the budget, but it's a lot closer. I also know that not everybody can and or will raise the pledge that much. So that means that ideally other people would have to go above and beyond the ask. And it's a big ask, I know. And that's fine. I don't want anyone to feel bad if they can't raise their pledge. And even if they pledge and they can't honor those commitments. I'm not asking anybody to put themselves in financial straits for the church. Absolutely not. I am asking everybody to consider giving something of themselves to the church. Your treasure pays for the things we need. The building, the activities we do, things like that. But your time and your talents are also needed to make those goals a reality. In closing, I've got a couple things I'd like you to consider. I personally give to a number of good charities I believe strongly in, and I'm going to continue to this year as well. I give to Trevor Project. I give to City House. I give to every library. These are things that are close to my heart. They need funds too. Things are more expensive. And they have outreach, and they try to give people to donate like everybody else, like all nonprofits. That's what nonprofits have to do. That's how it works, because they don't have anything to sell. They have to ask for money. But unlike other nonprofits out there, unlike Planned Parenthood, unlike the ACLU, unlike other groups that are out there, the only people that are going to donate to this church are the people of this church. Somebody driving down the street might go, I'm going to send a check to Planned Parenthood. No one driving down the street who doesn't come in these doors is going to write a check for us. We're going to count on our members and our friends. We are limited in that. We are the only people who are going to give and to gift to keep this church alive and thriving. Thank you.
Let us extinguish our chalice together by saying, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We have lives of such great abundance. Let us learn how to use our money and our possessions. Let us be wise and faithful stewards of the good gifts that we have been given. May we deliver ourselves from stinginess or wasteful extravagance. May the gifts of our hearts express the true spirit of generosity for love to one another and the greater world in the days ahead.